In 1996, Capcom released Resident Evil on the Sony PlayStation. Coining the term survival horror, it was basically an action-adventure game using 3D polygonal characters against 2D pre-rendered backgrounds. I remember seeing magazines at the time speaking highly of it, and rating it as though it was truly something you shouldn't miss. My roommate at the time and I were standing in Toys R Us a few days after its release, debating on whether or not it was worth $50. Finally deciding to split the cost and bring it home. That ended up being one of the best decisions I made during the 5th generation, because not only was Resident Evil an incredible game, it also happened to be one of the most memorable that entire generation. In this episode, we are going to take a look at it, and I'm going to share some opinions on why it was so well done, how the eventual Saturn release fared next to the PlayStation original, and why it has such a lasting appeal all these years later. This is Resident Evil. Welcome to Survival Horror.
Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers, Albert Wesker, Resident Evil.
Scary console games had been around for a long time, or at least software developers' attempt at scary games. Most of the early stuff was simplistic in nature, little more than action games with a mild visual similarity to things considered to instill fear. I can remember the laughable attempts on the NES with games like Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. Even stuff like the well-designed and much celebrated Sweet Home, Capcom's precursor to what would become the survival horror genre, wasn't what I'd call scary. The technology just wasn't there yet to really set up an environment convincing enough to get any real emotion out of you. Things kicked up a bit in the 16-bit era with Splatterhouse, a side-scrolling action title with gross imagery, macabre settings, and a story as dark as anything a game had attempted before it. Clock Tower on the Super Nintendo was an interesting mix of scares and the point-and-click genre, and mixed a few gameplay elements that stressed the player enough to definitely get an emotional reaction from it. There were other games, of course, that touched upon scary elements back then, but of the stuff I played, I certainly never felt any real sense of fear or dread. I was completely under the impression that a video game couldn't be scary, and that was just the way it was gonna be. Things radically changed for me as an owner of the 3DO. Alone in the Dark was a game type I had never played before, and it set a tone with its creepy music and unsettling environments that really struck a nerve. I was actually quite nervous adventuring into the new areas because I simply had no clue what was around the next corner. Did I have enough bullets to deal with it? Could I run? Was my healing item sufficient? While its slow gameplay left a fair bit to be desired, I loved the setting and the way the developers toyed with your expectations. I would also soon discover the Kenji Eno masterpiece D as well. It used full motion video to paint a scenario of traps, exploration, and a 3D environment that really did try and scare you. The story was actually quite good too, with a twist that made you appreciate the journey even more. Even games like Killing Time managed a setting that could creep you out. Ghostly images would explain story points and motivations in between the random bouts of shooting, and I really appreciated the attempt at being something more than what we had seen before it. While all these games were notable and well worth the time I sunk into them, none were a perfect mix of everything needed to deserve the label horror video game. Capcom had really been on to something with the Famicom game Sweet Home, however. While it lacked the visual and audio punch to truly excel at its craft, the game design was sound and the execution truly worth noting. You had to deal with an inventory system, you had limited ways of defending yourself, there were puzzles to figure out, and even multiple endings. There's a reason why Resident Evil was set in a mansion just like Sweet Home. In 1993, the director of Sweet Home, Takeru Fujiwara, and his protege Shinji Mikami set out to remake Sweet Home with the power of the upcoming 32-bit generation. Since Sweet Home had been based on a movie license, Capcom needed to come up with a new story, but the idea was pretty much set in stone. Since the Famicom's limited hardware resources had tied Fujiwara's hands in 1989, this new game would unshackle his creative vision and finally give the world a game he had always intended. This time it was going to be a first-person 3D adventure called Resident Evil with cooperative multiplayer, and it was going to set the world on fire. As with most games, things changed during development. The lead platform for Resident Evil was to be Sony's PlayStation, but it became clear quickly that drawing a 3D first-person engine was going to be more difficult than previously thought. During these early days, Shinji Mikami stumbled upon Alone in the Dark while doing his homework, and quickly realized that 2D pre-rendered backgrounds would give him the setting he needed to do his vision justice. This led to Resident Evil's now famous visual style, 3D polygons set against 2D backdrops that were essentially various camera angles that differed room to room. Mikami had also decided that he would use movies like The Shining, Zombie, and Dawn of the Dead as inspiration for his settings and enemies, trying to tie his work closer to Western horror movies instead of the supernatural influence of the original Sweet Home. With the graphics presentation changed up a bit, Mikami stuck with the many other elements from Sweet Home to build the game's core design. It was still set in a mansion, kept the focus on inventory management, puzzles, and exploration, and tied the story together with multiple playable characters and notes and diaries hidden throughout the game. Sweet Home's influence can be felt throughout the entire experience of Resident Evil, and it's a game well worth playing itself. There's even an English translation of it out there now. Of course, in 1996, I had no clue what the hell a Sweet Home was, or where Resident Evil got any of its inspiration. I had to take everything at face value. Capcom made it, so there was that. It was supposed to be different from anything else on the PlayStation, so I was all in for something new. And finally, I was a big fan of George Romero, so anything with zombies got an instant thumbs up on general principle of the matter. Playing it for the first time, I have no problem telling you I hated the controls. Tank style, always push up to walk forward, always down to back up, and always left and right to guide your on-screen persona those directions no matter which way the camera was facing you. These were the dark days of navigating 3D or 3D-like environments with digital pads, and I ate many a death trying to adjust. I had similar issues with Alone in the Dark, but that had been so much slower than Resident Evil. In that game, enemies had attacked you in comparative slow motion. When a zombie or other nightmarish ghoul came after you in Resident Evil, they were on you aggressively and ripped you apart. There wasn't a lot of room for error or mismanagement, and only time and practice really helped. Naturally, I did get better with more playtime, and what I was met with was nothing short of a revelation. Being trapped in this mansion invoked all sorts of emotion from me. I loved the fear of unlocking a new room, unsure of what I'd find. I loved the notes scribbled by the mansion's former staff, often the last words and thoughts before their horrific demise. I really enjoyed the way the gameplay forced you to deal with your limitations, both in the items you carried and how you protected yourself from its many threats. Waste too much ammo and you would find the only way through enemy-infested areas was to run and hope for the best. There were genuine elements of fear here, and it even took a few stabs at jump scares to even things out. The end result was nothing short of unforgettable. While I was never terrified or anything close, I did play the entire thing with a sense of foreboding that no game had ever given me. What manner of biological horror was just around the corner to tear me apart? Did I have the right items with me? Would I need to backtrack through a den of monsters that I had barely made it through previously? I didn't know the answer to any of these questions, and it was glorious. For the first time, a video game had made me think and consider literally every move before I made them. And not because of some absurd difficulty, but because you actually didn't want to see your on-screen personality die. Consider that for a moment. In a hobby where death and starting over had been the norm for 20 plus years, you simply didn't want to see your guy reduced to zombie food. The save system, of course, played a big part in that. Depending on where your last saved was, an impromptu death could send you back to the opening cinema no matter how far you had gotten. That's right, the original Resident Evil did not coddle you with checkpoints. You were in control of your own destiny, and it would not hold your hand in the process.
Help me, please! The door won't open! Quick!
Stay away from the door, Jill. I'm gonna kick this door down. Hurry! This way!
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
With the PlayStation version selling like hotcakes in virtually every region around the world, Capcom recognized quickly the need for a Sega Saturn version. It had initially rejected the idea based on the Saturn's 3D performance, judging that it would take too long to port and cost too much money. After reconsidering the financial possibilities, they sought a developer that had previously worked with the Saturn hardware and ported PlayStation games already. That developer was Nextech, the company that had done Cyber Speedway, Link Oliver Story, and ported Battle Arena Toshinden Remix. While Resident Evil on the Saturn definitely had some cutbacks here and there, they did an overall respectable job and kept the core gameplay intact and just as enjoyable. The first thing you're likely to notice in the Saturn port is that the texture work isn't as nice. The polygons look rougher and the fine detail, particularly around the faces, is almost clownish compared to the PlayStation effort. The models themselves are solid, however, and do not suffer the polygon clipping nearly as bad. Performance for the most part holds up outside of a few momentary hitches of slowdown here and there, and of course the Saturn's complexity with transparencies rears up as well. Most 3D based water and smoke are replaced by mesh effects that look noticeably less impressive than they did originally, and the Saturn's VDP1 half transparency will obliterate any sprite or polygon it covers. Thankfully, these things are an eyesore only in a very small part of the game, and the majority of the time the Saturn version is a solid looking and running addition. Capcom was even nice enough to throw in a few extras, like new costumes, new enemies, new bosses, and even a new battle game that allows you an arcade-like quick play using the settings and enemies from the main game. The Japanese version of Resident Evil was known as Biohazard, and I am often questioned as to the playability of this game thanks to its relative low cost. This version features a spoken script that is fully in English, so the main story is actually easy to understand and you have a good idea where you need to go after each cinema. The written notes and puzzles spread throughout the game are still in Japanese, however, so you may need to consult a walkthrough or FAQ a few times during your journey. Since the story is easy to follow, I consider it very much worth importing a Japanese version if you want to bypass the obnoxious prices for the US software at places like eBay. Doing this won't just save you money, but it will also give you access to the uncut opening movie and cinemas that US audiences never received. Finally, as simple and as cheesy as it was, the story of Resident Evil was absolutely perfect. Part mix of genre staples and trashy B-movie production values, it gave you everything you needed to be entertained. Small squad of elite soldiers trapped in a mansion with biological weapons running amok was a gamer's dream come true for me, and Capcom did an outstanding job bringing it all together on early polygon hardware like the Saturn and PlayStation. It picked up all the cultural inspiration it needed from previous films and games, and for the first time, presented a video game that genuinely made you feel uneasy. I'll always love it for that, and that feeling would only be expanded with its sequels. It also allowed you to explore at your own pace and in your own direction. How you went about this impacted the story and your interactions with its characters, even leading to different encounters and endings. It's a shame we never got to see how the Saturn would have handled Resident Evil 2, but we can still be grateful we saw the first one and even received a few exclusive editions. It's one of the best games ever made, and one I'll never forget. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.